Welcome to Real World Business Law, where we talk about real world issues impacting businesses. I'm Declan Leonard. I'm managing partner here at Berenzweig Leonard.
And I'm Stephanie Wilson. I'm a partner at Berenzweig Leonard and a director of our firm's government contracts practice.
And Stephanie, first off, I think this is the first one that you and I have done. It's great to be in the studio with you on an important topic. You have, in particular, stayed sort of at the forefront of, everything PPP since back in the early days of the pandemic. And here we are once again talking about this. So what is it that we keep seeing in the news?
So the Consolidated Appropriations Act was just signed into law by President Trump last Sunday. And most of what we've been hearing about is really the debate between whether the stimulus check is going to stay at $600, whether it's going to go up to $2,000. The House has already passed that. There's now a debate in the Senate on as to how that's going to be handled. But really what I think is a very important focus here is actually on the second round of the PPP loans. That has been a big issue really since the spring. And I think that the new round of PPP loans is going to be very helpful for a lot of the small businesses, particularly restaurants and hotels and businesses in that line of work.
Yeah, you're right, Stephanie. You cannot really turn on the news without seeing this debate. As usual, the Republicans, Democrats at each other's throats. $600. No, we want $2,000. It's like watching a tennis match back and forth, and then all of a sudden, President Trump comes in and steals all the tennis balls as usual. And so we don't know really where we are. Although right now, at least, the bill that was passed has this $600. What we're going to be talking about today is really what we really consider to be the meat and bones of it. That's not. I don't want to minimize that. That's real dollars that could go into people's pockets. People are hurting at this time of the pandemic. It continues to rage on. But what we're really going to be focusing a little bit more on is real relief, both on the company side and on the employee side. So let's jump into that. First off, we know that the original PPP loans that was, has gotten tons of attention back in the early days and months of the pandemic. So we have a new round of loans. What is this all about, and how is it different?
So what this new round of loans says is the previous round has expired, and so this restarts it through March 31st of 2021. And it's different from the previous round in that it has some more it has some more restrictions on who can apply for the loans this time around. So with some limited exceptions, borrowers must now have no more than 300 employees, where in the previous round they could have up to 500 employees. And then there's also a new factor, a financial test in a sense, where the borrower needs to demonstrate that they had a 25% drop in their gross receipts during either the first, second, third, or fourth quarter of 2020 as compared to that same quarter in 2019.
So that's really interesting, because the first round of PPP loans, really all you had to do was demonstrate that you had, you basically were certifying that there was uncertain conditions that made this loan necessary. But it wasn't really a data-driven certification. Now we've got this data-driven certification, and as you said, it's based on revenue comparisons, looking at one quarter in 2020 versus 2019. The one caveat, or maybe the one piece of advice I'd throw in there is companies often do their accounting on an accrual basis. And I think for this purposes, they really ought to look at both the accrual and the cash basis, because particularly in the cash basis, that relies on money in the door, cash receipts. That's the money that you use to pay payroll and all of your other operating expenses. And you may have had some high billings for some of these months in 2020, but you may have had slow payments, especially in that second quarter when it was really taking shape at its heaviest.
Right. And that certification of financial need is still a requirement this time around. But I think that, as you mentioned, having this specific way to measure, whether you have really been impacted in 2020 is important. And it should help potential borrowers make that decision as to whether or not to apply for this loan.
I think it's fair to say we'll see a lot more limited companies applying. And you mentioned earlier about the hospitality industry. I know that they've just been crushed. And so I think this latest round, is it fair to say, kind of had them in mind versus companies that have been able to, with a lot of ingenuity, have been able to thrive during this period?
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular round, for the most part, the calculation of the maximum amount of the loan that you can receive is the same. It's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs. There is an exception, or rather a different way of calculating for those businesses that are in the food and accommodation services sector. So they can actually receive up to 3.5 times their average monthly payroll costs.
So
And
in
then
the
all of
first,
these are
oh, go
actually
ahead.
subject, oh, sorry. And all of these are subject to a $2 million cap, where in the previous round, it was $10 million. So you're not going to see the situation we had before where some of these businesses received PPP loans that were 8, 9, $10 million. It really is focused on those small businesses with fewer employees who are really hurt and who could really use this amount of money.
Now, I remember for the first round of PPP loans, there was some criticism because it was limited largely to payroll expenses as well as largely rental payments. And a lot of businesses were saying, you know what, there's a whole lot more to my business than just payroll and rent. Has that changed in this new round?
Yeah, so what this new round does is it still has the same minimum allocation of 60% of your loan has to go to payroll costs to get the full forgiveness,
Uh-huh.
but it has expanded the definition of eligible forgivable non-payroll costs. So, for example, it includes what they define as the covered business expenditures, covered operations expenditures. So that would include software or cloud computing services that support HR, payroll, sales and billing, accounting, things like that. It also includes a provision that allows for recovery of expenses for certain worker protection. So PPE, improvements to your air filtration system, setting up barriers or testing centers or things like that. So it has expanded what operating costs and additional business costs can be forgiven.
Yeah, that was a big criticism early on, is that you could not, there was no encouragement to spend the original PPP loans on PPE, personal protection equipment. And that was when all of us were just trying to find our way. Were we going to reopen offices? Were we going to do things? So now here we are basically about to turn the calendar over to 2021. And finally, they're saying you can use these loans for protective equipment, PPE. I guess better late than never at this stage. So that's good to see. What about forgiveness? Have they done anything related to that? Because that's a lot for people who took the loans the first go around. Forgiveness has been sort of top of mind. We've talked about this form that the SBA is requiring, the form 3509 for those who took out $2 million or more. We've talked about that in other broadcasts. But is there anything in this new legislation related to the forgiveness process?
Yeah, so there are a few different things. So one is that for companies or businesses that borrowed $150,000 or less, they're trying to simplify the process even more. So what Congress has directed the SBA to do is to create a one-page self-certification document. And that would include on there a description of the number of employees that the borrower was able to retain because of the loan, the estimated amount of the loan spent on payroll costs, and the total loan amount. And it should be much more simplified than even the easy form that we have right now. Once that's released, that should hopefully make the process much more simple for those smaller borrowers to be able to apply for forgiveness. They also have asked the SBA to develop a forgiveness audit plan. So what that is going to do is hopefully create some transparency as to what the metrics are the SBA is going to put in place as to which loans it will actually audit and what those audit policies and procedures will be.
Okay, good. So they've done a lot to hopefully down the road create sort of a roadmap, because there has been a lot of confusion. I'm just going to add, before we hit to some of the employee-based benefits under this new stimulus package, I want to add perhaps something that's not getting much play in the press, because it gets a little bit in the weeds from a tax perspective, but it has been very much front and center in the minds of companies, which is the tax deductibility of the amounts that they spent on their loan. So, for instance, in the first PPP go round, you had to spend it largely on payroll and rent. Well, up until this latest stimulus passed, the IRS was taking the position that those expenses that you were using paid for by PPP loans was not tax deductible. And that was going to be really quite a surprise from a tax perspective for companies at the end of the year. A lot of companies were waiting to see what would happen in this. And sure enough, it did come through. On the federal side, there's still a question mark, I think, on the state side as to whether or not those expenses will be deductible. But at least on the federal side, we now have more clarity. Businesses now know that that's going to be deductible. And the reason why this is important also is because businesses make decisions based on budgets. And when they're able to save some money on taxes, like I think that this will do, they're able to increase a compensation for employees. They're able to perhaps hire somebody new. So this is not just putting money in the pockets of some nameless, faceless company. This actually does really flow down to the way it operates its business. And I think it goes to the betterment of the employees and the workforce. So now,
right, and like, as you mentioned,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. So as you mentioned, and that is a complete reversal of the previous IRS guidance. So I think this is a situation where Congress has really listened to, the public and what was a real concern for them.
Yeah, no doubt. So then some of the direct, we talked earlier about the $600 payment to individuals. That's employees, but it's really just individuals. Talk about some of the others, for specifically unemployment insurance and how that's changed, but still been covered under this new stimulus package.
Right. So the new stimulus package provides now a $300 per week in additional federal unemployment benefits, and that will go through March 14th of 2021. And it also extends the pandemic unemployment assistance program, which was aimed at freelancers and independent contractors. And so that's for the same time period through March 14th, and they'll receive an additional $100 per week. Also, on the payroll credits that companies received under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, so for the paid sick leave and the paid family leave, while that paid there's no longer a mandate to provide that paid leave after December 31st. Employers can still take advantage of that payroll credit if they do offer that leave voluntarily.
Got it. In my experience working with clients is they're looking at this and saying, you know what, it's still available largely through the first quarter of 2021. It's money that the federal government is basically subsidizing. So why not offer that even if it's not an absolute requirement? So I think that was a smart move, maybe not to make it a mandate, but also to give that financial incentive. And Stephanie, getting back to the unemployment compensation. So originally it was $600 when the original PPP package, the stimulus package was passed, $600 that the federal government was kicking in every week for somebody's unemployment compensation. There was some criticism about that, basically saying that maybe that was incentivizing some people not to go back to work because in essence what you were getting is almost $1,000 a week to stay home. And so this $300 I think was a compromise. It's important to note, though, that, for as much as we hear on the press about this $600 payment going to every person or whether it's going to be $2,000, the unemployment compensation is a way more targeted, in my opinion, a way more targeted benefit because you could in 2 weeks make up that $600 on additional unemployment compensation.
Right, exactly. And that's the individuals who are really impacted immediately right now. They're out of work, and so they really benefit from this.
Yes, and that goes, I believe that's going to go all the way till the middle of March. And who knows, maybe that will even get extended more. And what it really means is, so like, here in Virginia, I think the maximum you top out in state weekly unemployment is like $385. I could be off by a few dollars there, but it's about $385. So that means you're going to be getting $685 going forward per week because you got the $300 being kicked in at the federal level. Those are real dollars, and I think you make a great point, which is, what we hear in the press about the 600 versus 2,000, that's going to go to people who are working who may not be very impacted right now by the pandemic. The unemployment compensation, where people are out of work, to me, this subsidy on the federal side is a really targeted and good benefit.
One other thing to note is for government contractors specifically is that the CARES Act Section 3610, which a lot of government contractors have been able to take advantage of, that has been extended until March 31st as well.
Oh, got it. Okay. So it looks like they use this to not only create some new benefits for both companies and employees, but they also used it to sort of do a little bit of cleanup, fill in some of the gaps that perhaps the initial legislation, which I think everyone will admit was rushed out and needed to be rushed out because of what we were facing. They kind of filled in the gaps on this.
Right, absolutely. And I think, we'll continue to see some of those gaps filled as the implementing regulations come out. We'll get further guidance from SBA and the other impacted agencies here. So there certainly will be, further updates on this, but I think that overall, this package is very good for the business community and for the employees.
Yeah. In other words, we probably have not seen the last of this. There may be more benefits coming down the line. Listen, Stephanie, I'm so glad you were able to join us today with Real World Business Law. Another great discussion. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And stay tuned for the next one.